So I'd like to introduce to you Ellen Carey, who is Associate Professor of Photography at the esteemed Harvard Art School at the University of Hartford. She holds an MFA in Photography and Art History from SUNY Buffalo. She has a BFA in Printmaking and Photography from Kansas City Art Institute, and it also previously attended the Art Students League studying lithography and drawing. She Her many experiences have brought her into fine art and avant-garde approaches in photography. She, in fact, was hired by Robert Cumming for her current position at the Harvard Art School. She also works with color photography, photograms, large format Polaroid. Is there anything else I should add to that? A laundry list. And you can also, please, I encourage you to visit her website. There's a lot of great information and images on there too. Her extensive career in photography has had her featured in many solo and group exhibitions around the globe, including Paris, Taiwan, Montreal, just about anywhere in the United States included. And she's been the recipient of numerous notable grants, awards, fellowships, and honors in recognition of her work as well. I could really go on and on. She's been featured in publications and has most recently had solo exhibitions um, in Connecticut, correct, at the New Britain Museum of American Art, which drew in over 30,000 visitors. And also her show Light Struck, featured at the Fox Talbot Museum in Laycock, England, drew over 200,000 visitors. Amazing. As well as some recent group exhibitions too. So we're excited to have you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me tonight. I appreciate everyone's coming. It is Connecticut here. We've had about 3 weeks of snowstorms. It's been
Yes.
getting cold, and now we're going to have some more rain and snow soon. But thank you very much. We can start. The talk will be about 40 minutes. We'll have room at the end for Q&A. So let's try to hold that till the end so I can just kind of walk smoothly from my trajectory. We're going to start. We can go ahead and start with the first opening here. So the name of can everyone hear me? We're all good? Okay, so the name of my talk is Back to the Future, the Avant-Garde as an Address, with subcategories Photography Degree 0, which references my Polaroid 2024 work, specifically the pulls, which is my contribution to our field, and you'll look at that in a minute, in 1996. Struck by Light is my photogram darkroom practice from 1988 to the present. Pictus and Writ is my scholarship, research, and writing. So Back to the Future references not only the film, but the idea of photography. We're in our 200th anniversary, 1826, with NIEPS. I did check with the esteemed John Rohrbach, the senior curator emeritus. So I think there's some controversy about when did photography officially start. You know, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have cell phones, so 1826 is with NIEPS. And then we have William Henry Fox Talbot in Laycock with his pioneer and polymath, doing the paper negative. We'll look at that. His contemporary was Anne Atkins, and then, of course, we have Daguerre in Paris. The avant-garde, I'm going to be specifically, there are many avant-gardes around the world through different times and different cultures. Mainly my focus is the avant-garde from these, the clusters of photography, and also specifically the Paris avant-garde moving to New York City. So, and since I'm an American artist, I'll be talking about that as well. My website is www.ellencareyphotography.com. It is up to date till 2025, not up to 2026. And I do have a Wikipedia page. So there is that. And there's contact information on my website if you would like to get in touch. But we can go ahead and start with the first slide. Photography is very democratic. It's multicultural. It's global. We have all kinds of APAD, Perry Photo, Photo London, Everything since COVID is basically open call. But to give my my talk today, context and content, um, I grew up the second oldest of five. I was raised Catholic. My dad was in retail with Macy's in New York City. I lived in New York, Atlanta, Chicago, back to New York. I went to Kansas City Art Institute and then did my graduate work at SUNY Buffalo. But this, I start with this slide. This is myself as a freshman in Kansas City. And of course, the Nelson Atkins Museum was across the street. And the project was given by our teachers, mentors at that time, which was to give us a section of a wall and say, look, you do something with this wall. You can't use traditional art materials, no paint, and that was the assignment. Which again, you think, well, what does that mean? You're all studying art. You don't know what it is. I grew up Catholic. You'll see the influence of the stained glass windows. So I went to the kitchen there and I borrowed some mustard and ketchup bottles. I went to the silk screen and I took that ink and I stapled strips of paper to the wall and I started dripping. Now you'll see how this working off the wall, working with color, I had Joseph Alber's color theory in freshman year. Of note, though, is when I had Jansen's history of art, there were no women artists in there, no photographers, men and women. So just to keep that, this is the early 70s. The Cultural Revolution was going on vis-a-vis music, theater, the arts, Woodstock, et cetera, et cetera. So I inherited the avant-garde from Paris, which came to New York with Jackson Pollock, whose teacher was Thomas Hart Benton, who also taught at the Kansas City Art Institute. So we can go to the next slide. I began doing printmaking, and we had Kansas City had a modern kind of brutalist building where the ground floor was all printmaking with etching, silkscreen, monoprints, lino cuts, very sophisticated. Maybe like 5,000 square feet. On the other half was lithography, but it was really, and piece is significant to me. And as a footnote, you'll notice that I'm very interested in the negative image, the positive and the negative. And that's where this comes in. This is quite large. It's about 30 by 40 inches. And we did photolithos came in. They were the little plates that you could, were light sensitive and you had to develop those. And this became sort of signaled. I was up in the dark room um, doing black and white photography and kind of going in between both studio spaces. We can go to the next. But I think, uh, again, it was an empty field. And when I say this to people, I mean, you had the Ansel Adams workshop, you heard about Ansel Adams, and of course, Man Ray. You'll see my influences are surrealism, Dada, moving towards abstract expressionism, minimalism, conceptual art as we move through feminism, with an artist. But it was really this moment. I was at a friend of mine's house who was also a photographer, and I had the camera and I put out the window. And this is a single frame. That actually the last frame of the film that I was using. And I realized when I developed it, it's what Cartier-Bresson calls the decisive moment. And this is where the world opened up to me. So if you read John Zarkowski's wonderful essay called Mirrors and Windows from his show at the Museum of Modern Art, where he talks about photography being a window to our world or a mirror to it. This is also kind of prescient in that's my hand, and sort of I do a lot of self portraits, and this little tiny white dog was across the street. When I took the picture, the action takes place in front of our eyes in photography, but we can't really see that. And after I took the picture, the dog was gone. So it was really a single frame. And that was where my love of photography and working in the darkroom, 10, 12, 15-hour days with my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, um, really made a commitment to me. And then I began to understand photography with light. So we are challenged as photographers They give us many, many tools and inventions and cameras and lenses. But really, it's a challenge because we can't hold light like we can a paintbrush or a pen if you're a writer. Let me go to the next slide. At this time, so I finished my work at undergraduate work. I supported myself at Kansas City Art Institute. I worked as a model for Hallmark cards, so I was at the other side of the lens. Also waitressing, hostessing. I went to grad school. I wanted to go without working at all. I had 3 jobs putting myself through school. Grad school, I went to SUNY Buffalo. At that time, Governor Rockefeller was the um, governor of New York. He was very interested in the arts, painting and sculpture. And he developed the media lab. He brought in video, film, photography. We had Robert Creeley, who was the poet, Michael Tilson Thomas. So it was a very lively scene. The Albright Knox was also a museum which had a huge collection on abstract expressionist paintings. And in my research, I discovered that it was museums who forefronted photography. The museum worked with Alfred Stieglitz of 291, and they first showed modernist photography there. At this time, I worked at a camera store, so of course we have equipment, lenses, and so forth. And I moved up to 120 film with a Mamiya C330. This is a portrait of my mother at that time, and I was using a mirror to, again, not having read because it hadn't, I think it just had opened in the 60s. We didn't have the internet, mirrors and windows, using the light on her eye, and that little circle reminds me of an aperture lens or, pinhole photography, camera obscura. And you see the circles. So we can go on the next slide. This also led me to these pen lights, moving the lights in front with the shutter open, and you'll see how that influences a discovery I made in a Man Ray photograph. So we got the These were printed on 120 film. It was Tri-X film. They're basically Kodak paper, which I toned with selenium, and they're about 15.5 inches square floating on a 16 by 20 paper. So this begins this series working with light. Let me go to the next one. I'll just go like this. This is a very funny postcard that we did. That's Cindy Sherman there in the middle. Myself is to the right. Sandra Matthews there, and these 2 other, can't remember their names. I think Linda, that's her name with the long hair. She belongs to SPE. So this was our show together doing the show. So we showed on Cindy Sherman and I first. We can go to the next slide. Showed together on this is in Western New York. So this was Linda Cathcart was an avant-garde curator who came from UC Berkeley. So UC Berkeley was the hip and happening place if you want to be a visual artist on the West Coast. And then Governor Rockefeller made SUNY Buffalo the flagship uh, university if you want to do poetry, literature, music, fine arts. Linda was hired by Marcia Tucker, who was the first female director at the Whitney. And then Linda came up to the Albright Knox and was our first contemporary art curator. In Western New York, echoed what we call the biennials, like the Whitney Biennial and the Venice Biennale. And this is actually continues today. So this was first started, I think, in 1976. So I have that catalog. There's another pen light image. Go ahead.
Join.
Oh, I can just,
Sorry.
we can go to the next one. This is Cindy Sherman and I on the bus. We literally had no place to show. So this was Buffalo Evening News featured us. It was Jimmy Carter, who with his wife started the National Endowment for the Arts. And in that organization, grants were given to New York State. And SIPA Gallery was a center for exploratory photography. And the arts was a alternative space, like hall walls, like we have artist space in New York City, PS1, MoMA, which is now part of MoMA, PS1. And Cindy Sherman's, I think, very well known is her bus series. So she made a whole kind of idea around traveling on the bus. And in these other panels here are smaller pictures, what I call my conceptual portraits, similar to what Jess used to saw. A Polaroid, of course, fabulous, right? Edwin Land was actually born in Connecticut in 1948. He did his presentation in New York City, thinking to his shareholders, well, maybe I'll sell, 90 pictures or 90 cameras, the peel apart. Um, and they sold 9,000. They had 9,000 orders, and he did that. Of course, there's lots and lots of books and history on that. But the super shooter camera was that plastic camera, and these are little kind of fun. I'm adding glitter to it. My sparkling self. The original stacks up to the top, going out at night, drawing. I was still doing these I was influenced by the Harry Who School in Chicago, sort of these wiggly things, reading books, sleeping, going out, kind of fun. We didn't have female studies. We could go on to women's studies, the next one. Um, this is again the super shooter camera. I went around to this wig store and I put on wigs, imagining what I would look like with different hair colors. And this was supposed to be an installation. I still have this piece. So we didn't have gender studies. So this was me exploring the self, and I don't think it's unusual for people who start photography to point the camera out in the world and then turn the camera onto themselves. The history of self-portraiture in photography is enormous, as you can see from a lot of history books, especially now with the iPhone. That's okay. We can go to the next one.
Okay.
Wendy, I'll just go like this.
I can't see you. I
Oh,
can only see. I can
sorry.
only see the screen. It's okay.
Okay, next. Sorry. Um, my show I became very restless with the Polaroid. I think introduced a certain, uh, again, Ansel Adams was there, Robert Cumming, Tableau Vivants, Les Krims, Dwayne Michaels, Ralph Gibson. There was a group of photographers who were breaking boundaries and bringing in conceptual art. Bill Wegman, John Baldessari, and I was becoming very restless with the surface of the print. So I borrowed some techniques from my days of doing lithography. So I airbrushed over the picture, and then the next one I went from black to white, and the next slide wearing black. So this is sort of interesting, and then gray, and then I did a brief, you know, one in color. So these are kind of overpainting. The show, this catalog, the next one, Wish You Were Here, the Buffalo Avant-Garde of the 70s. Terrific show. They only made 1,000 catalogs. So this documents that time. Halls Frampton was in, structuralist film, filmmaking. You had Toronto, you had Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, the George Eastman House. So we had John Fall. It was a really incredible time to be there. After I graduated from my MFA studies, I stayed for a couple of years and I was Linda Cathcart's assistant in museum studies and her curatorial assistant. Now, next slide, please. And then I moved to New York City. So everyone was leaving, going to New York. I had lived, I was born in New York, Atlanta, Chicago, lived around cities. There was really nothing for me to do. I'd already been there for about 5 years. Had a scholarship. I finished my undergrad work in 3.5 years. I had a year and a half after, and then I had 2 years and a couple of years. So I scaled up. I started with the male nude, female nude. This is part of a show that Linda did called The Heroic Figure. There were 13 artists, 10 men, and 3 women. The men were dealing with the figures. So it was Mabel Thorpe, David Sally, Julian Schnabel, sculpture, John Ahern, and then the women were myself, Cindy Sherman, self-portrait, and Nancy Dwyer. The San Paulo Biennale opened in South America. The Falkland Wars opened at that time, so we were allowed to travel. I traveled around for 2 years and then came up to North America. So I just lived in an apartment in Little Italy, 5-floor tenement walk up. I was a waitress. I started teaching at Queens College, ICP, but keep it in mind that New York City if you want to look at Netflix and watch Jean-Michel Basquiat's Boom for Real. So it was a very gritty, everything lower than 14th Street by NYU was pretty much derelict. Soho had these big lofts or Little Italy, tenement, Tribeca, and so forth. So I just lived, you know, and we had a place where I did these big blow ups and overpainting. This is what I would call transitional work, moving. I went back to the self portrait. We could go down a few more slides here and return to the self portrait where there was this film that you could develop the film instead of getting negatives, you would get positives. So I printed it as a negative. I became very interested. I also read a lot in Catholic school, but also in high school, I got very interested in Jean-Paul Sartre's Being in Nothingness, Simone de Beauvoir. I was reading philosophy, literature. I went from not my mother and father would say, all of a sudden you don't, and all of a sudden you're reading tons of books. So became very interested in the negative image, and that sort of as a metaphor, which we'll come into later, and overpainting the picture. We can go to the next one. Again, I think these are pretty much transitional work. Um, in 1984, the Polaroid 2024 camera was, of course, one of Edwin Land's, mega cameras. He built it for his shareholders. He was up at um, housed in the School of the Museum of Fine Arts across from the MFA in Boston. And they had two people who sponsored you. My sponsor was Sam Yanes, and they, through my friend Sandy Feldman, also a photographer, invited me to come up and work on the camera. So this was a very interesting and I would say probably, um, a very important time because I had had color theory, Joseph Albers, in undergrad school, but I hadn't had a real, I loved color. And this particular image, I think, was a turning point for me. And that Polaroid color is just incredible. I mean, the luminosity, the opacity, the dyes, it's just breathtaking, a beautiful object. And I think the neo-expressionist movement that I was sort of in the periphery of with Metro Pictures and the Lower East Side, um, and also my brother was an AIDS doctor and told me about AIDS and the drugs coming with cocaine, heroin, etc., the graffiti. Um, but I couldn't really paint over it anymore. It was so beautiful. And I thought I did this white enamel, this is called lightning. And for me, this was a point of departure. And we can go to the next slide. I returned to Polaroid up in Boston and I started doing double exposures. One of my jobs in New York City was being an editor at Mademoiselle magazine, which is owned by Condé Nast. Um, and at that time, there was something called stat shops. So I had a book on copyright-free designs. These were high contrast black and white, mainly used by architects and graphic designs. And I went in and I did these double exposures. So this is a 1984 double exposure. Again, a kind of breakthrough. This work is still continues to be exhibited today in the context of self-portraiture, women in self-portraiture. It kind of predates digital imaging, neo-op, and we can go through the next few slides pretty quick. So this 84 was 1985, 86. This was a show that Buzz Hartshorn did. There's ICP was way uptown on Fifth Avenue and 96th Street, and Buzz Hartshorn, who had gone to Visual Studies Workshop. So there was sort of this group in Kansas City Art Institute, Steve Rifkin, Chuck Kelton, Charlie Steinbach, who went on to New York, and then there was a group from Visual Studies, SUNY Buffalo, Buffalo State that came to New York. So Buzz started this series called New Direction series, and this was a survey that I had at ICP Uptown. Go to the next one. This piece is significant. I'll talk a little longer about it because this began to make me realize that not only is photography, the word PHOS means light, graphese is drawing. So a lot of our language and lexicon comes from the Greeks or Latin. The object often names the photo object is often named what the process is. So Polaroid 2024 names the photo object that you're looking at, not unlike what your workshops are, photographs, cyanotype, etc. But it was this piece that made me realize that light is color. And here you see the red and the green mixing to make yellow, and the red and the blue making the magenta, and the blue and the green making cyan. So we have photographic color theory. RGB are the primary additives, and yellow, magenta, cyan are the subtractives. So this is moving more and more towards a more minimalist, you'll see as we move along. And this is self-portrait as well. 87, 86, 8. So this was a very substantial. A lot of people use that Polaroid 2024 camera. There's many people go in and do it. Andy Warhol, Wegman used it a lot, Chuck Close, Mary Ellen Mark, Elsa Dorfman. A lot of people really could, express themselves with the camera, but a lot of people just used it a few times. Well, Rauschenberg used it quite a bit. And I was sponsored by them for many, many years. Black Monday is, we have many challenges as photographers. One of them is the external world, which we can't really have any control of. So Black Monday was October 10th, 1987. There was a crash on Wall Street. Basically, Lower East Side closes, the galleries close, Polaroid's support program closes. I start doing what I call material tests for Cibachrome, but I didn't really like the grain. I liked the metallic sort of under finish of the Cibachrome, but I didn't really like seeing grain. So I kind of just did more and more work, corporate work, commercial work, and I decided to, fund my own. Uh, I fell in love with Polaroid and started reading a lot of history, went back to William Henry Fox Talbot and Atkins. We can go ahead and go forward. We can go forward. This is significant in that it's a departure. I was reading David Hockney's book, one of his books about photography being the one-eyed cyclops. You point and shoot, and of course Kodak would have that as well. And one of I lived 6 months in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I was at a faculty meet create. I was teaching there, and I met this person said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "I'm a photographer." And I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, you know, I discovered Pluto." So I went, "Wow, okay." So he said to me, "Well, Albert Einstein said art and science are branches of the same tree." And I asked him what he meant by that. And he said, "Well, there's the DNA helix, which is our, genetic code. We have the rule of thirds. We have fractal geometry." So I took my research skills that I learned at Mademoiselle, which I also love art history and reading and stuff like that. And I applied it to this. So all these shapes in here are like references to fractals and the golden mean. They have real meaning in the external world. Oh, goodness. Well, 1987. So that was rough. I had my apartment in Little Italy. I had just secured a studio in Soho. It was really rough. Looked like we were having a big depression, which we were. Drugs were coming in, people were dying, AIDS. I went back into the dark room. So I was having what, it's called the artist struggle. It's not a very glamorous place to be. Most people don't talk about it, but if you read about, Man Ray or Claude Monet or Coco Chanel, just pick anybody, read about their lives. You could also read it by Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, Plato's Cave. So I really didn't know what I was doing, and it's like, okay, I had this fantastic, um, from 1983 starting with Polaroids of black and white to 87, 88. I had this 5-year arc where I could go use the Polaroid camera 2 or 3 times a day, $20,000 thing. And, all of a sudden it's gone. Um, So I went back in the dark room and I was in this conundrum, kind of existential state where I just didn't know what I was going to do. So I love Jackson Pollock and abstract expressionism and surrealism. A lot of my projects, I have a kind of visual map, so to speak. But most of my inquiries, and this is where that started, start with a question. And my question is, what is an abstract photograph? Because I understood abstract painting, surrealism, Dada, struggled with minimalism, but was getting it, conceptual art. So, what was an abstract photograph? I didn't know. So, I went back into the darkroom. I researched Talbot and these next few. These are black and white photographs. We'll go ahead. This one, however, was a turning point. So, I did a black and white photogram. I went to the Polaroid studio. Again, I made a commitment. Okay, materials have meaning. They most certainly do. It doesn't matter if you studied Donald Judd or Dan Flavin or Pollock or whatever materials they choose have context and have content and have meaning. So I made a commitment. This is for exposure. I was beginning to study photographic color theory. And this also, so if you look at the red and blue, that makes magenta, um, where the green and the red mix makes yellow light, and where the blue and the green make cyan. Where they stack up together makes white light. So we're not mixing pigment, we're mixing light. So there is references Sir Isaac Newton in 1702, his treatise called Optics, where he put a prism down and white light goes through there and makes colors. We see that in the rainbow. And this also is for exposure. So I'm it's a rotary, so that references Duchamp's rotary. Um, you see the movement around as it spreads around. I'm also including the material of Polaroid. So the top has what's called the Polaroid tulips, which are those sort of filigree in the top. I include the roller marks and the whole picture, even though this is called the Polaroid 2024. That references the camera and the machine, and of course, Edwin Land, etc. But the image itself is about 22 inches by, if you take the whole piece of paper, 34 inches. Go ahead. So there's a backstory to this, but I'll get to that in a minute. So this is really my first pull. 1996, on the left panel. So Polaroid was making color film. Their early film was called P3, P6, P7. They had a short interim period of making black and white film. Early black and white film, like Rauschenberg used, had to be coded. Like if you used the, peel apart the uh, positive, negative PN film, you had to code the positive, and you could develop the instruction. So this is a rectangle. The Polaroid is white light. This is a monochrome palette. And the black underneath is the conical loop, which is called a parabola. This introduces a variation on the decisive moment in Polaroid. And the big black pole there is no exposure. So this names my practice, what we call practice now, after Roland Barthes' avant-garde book, Writing Degree Zero. Writing Degree Zero talks about the French avant-garde in literature. Of course, Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre. So what he says is the creative act just is, sayest. There's no narrative arc. There's no beginning, middle, or end. It just is. And if you look at the Dada surrealist game of the exquisite corpse, of course, that is, where the, Man Ray and Andre Breton and, Lee Miller are trying to get into the subconscious. They're trying to find creative ways to express their visual creative thinking. What's interesting about this piece as well is even though I had a kind of layperson's knowledge about things like fractal geometry, which is in nature, this in Snowflake, there's a great book called Proportional Harmonies Found in Nature, Science, Mathematics, Architecture, The Golden Mean. the pyramids, basically we have two visual codes, the circle and the square. So as photographers, we're dealing literally with the circular lens and the rectangle or square of the body, of the camera body. So the problem, I had a friend who was a physicist, one of my colleagues, and I said, what is that shape? He goes, oh, that's a parabola. And I go, okay, what is that? He said, it's in the cone family. It's in the circle and the square. But where do we see it in nature? I asked him. He said, we see it at the tip of the frontal tip of a comet or a silhouette of a cone. So this is the dyes exhausting themselves. Edward Land, the negative comes down in front of the camera, exposes the negative. It drops through a tray and the pod breaks. The pods have the chemistry. So if you had an SX70, that's a very small version of what I do. So we can go to the next. What's so great about this camera? Whoops, go back.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's roll film, just like 35 millimeter, only it's much bigger. So this is, I can make them as high as I want. So this is RGB, and this is a rollback. So this is 1990 plus 96, 97, and then we can go to the next one. We can go through this. I also do installations. This is called Morning Wall, Family Portrait, Birthday Portrait. We can go to the next one. And this is, oh, go back, sorry.
Hold on, sorry. There we go.
Excuse me, I've been talking all day teaching, so I have a little raspy throat. So this is called Morning Wall. This was a finalist for the Whitney Biennial. They moved it to the year 2000. I made it through the first, second, and the third. I didn't get through because I didn't get the top four, but I went ahead and made it anyway. So this is 100 negatives representing the transition from the 20th century to the 21st century. I knew the negatives were going to change, but I didn't know how they were going to change. And they definitely oxidized and dripped. These are 100 Polaroid black and white negatives. That's a picture of me in front of there. The whole piece is 45 feet wide and 15 feet high. So if you go to it starts on the bottom as, one goes 1 to 20, then 21 to 40. It's 100 years of loss. So I started doing research into love and loss, and there's a backstory to that, which will come up in a minute. Go ahead. So this in the middle room. So this is a huge. This is a formerly the Royal Typewriter Factory in Hartford. So in Hartford, like Buffalo, in the 19th century, because it had the Connecticut River, we had the Niagara Falls, etc., different riverways, was a very wealthy city and has amazing cultural. Mark Twain, Harriet Beecher Stowe. We had the Hillstead Museum with Theodate Pope was the first female architect. We have the Wadsworth Athenaeum was built in 1842 and opened in 1844, right around about Talbot. So, and we had, Saul LeWitt, Aldecott and Calder. I mean, it's just like incredible. Music, theater, literature, poetry, Wallace Stevens. So in this middle panel, you see two blacks, two whites, black and two whites. So right before I moved to New York City, my dad was an international businessman. My parents moved out of the United States to Kuwait to the Middle East. 2 weeks before I moved to New York City, I had a sudden death. My father died. I moved to New York City. Didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live. I was in mourning. I mean, quite had great friends. But in 1995, my mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And then I have a middle brother who's an AIDS doctor and had an accident and cracked his skull, and he died suddenly. So this idea of mourning, love, and loss became sort of central. And in my bereft moment, I went to the Polaroid studio thinking about what the photographs do. They are family portraits and family albums. And I was doing a lot of research on mourning, which we really didn't have any visuals on it. And I realized, I was reading the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying and Elizabeth Tubler's loss books, but there wasn't really anything, there are different cultures that express this. But in photography, they had series of parents in the 19th century who lost their children, and they take pictures of them as the relatives. And in that context, I thought, well, I'm going to go back to the Polaroid studio. It was August of 1996, and I'm going to do my version of a family portrait as a minimalist conceptual experimental artist. And I just had to. I was so bereft. My aunt died, and my marriage ended. It was just like, you know, I used to answer the phone and say, "Hi, this is the Carey crisis. I'm sorry." It's like she's very busy right now. So I did the two blacks for my parents, two whites for my older brother, the middle one for my brother John, my younger siblings. And what was so interesting about this experience, this is the negatives on the opposite wall all look the same, which, and they were matted. You couldn't reflect, there was no reflection. And they reminded me of open burial pits. Um, and it reminded me of a story when I was up at the Albright Knox on Mark Rothko. And I was talking to the painter, Alfred Jensen. It was Nancy Graves' opening, and I was standing next to great Alfred Jensen, who was also showing there at that time. And we were talking about Rothko, and I said to him, I wonder why he did those rectangles like that. And he said, "Oh, Ellen, he did that because in Russia, the men would come in and invade his village, and the women and the children, the men would build these, open these burial pits, and then they would shoot the men, and then the women and children had to would bury. And that's not written in any Rothko books that I've read. Uh, so that symbol of the square and the rectangle was very powerful. Then I began to do research on the negative, the history of the negative in the visual arts. And there is a lot of information. There's a great book called Short History of the Shadow in Art. There's a whole chapter on photography. And as photographers, we're given light that also gives us reflection, refraction, silhouette, shadow out. So I started keeping the negatives as kind of also a kind of reference to Talbot and the paper negatives. So we can go to the next one. This room had all two of these. There it is. And someone said, oh, it looks like a minimal abstract painting. And then it reminded me, my grandparents had a baby grand piano, and this reminded me of the onyx ivory keys and the black keys on the piano. I don't play the piano, but I remember seeing it. And then I push pin them to the wall. There's another slide coming up. And here's the negative. So it was really interesting. As a Catholic, when you're raised Catholic, everybody has different cultures. Of course, sitting Shiva is Jewish, and in the Middle East, where my dad died, they buried them out in the desert. He was back to the States. We have an open coffin. Catholics have a viewing, and then a Catholic. Yes, go ahead. Go to the next one. And the one on this wall looks like tombstone. So it was sort of the end of a family unit. My parents are gone, my brother's gone. That's kind of the end, the family tradition. In that context, the next slide, go ahead. That's great, Candace. I decided to do birthday portrait, and this is a triptych honoring my parents with gender codes of boys. So you have blue for my father and my brother. Uh, pink is, of course, if you saw the Barbie movie, pink is the American gender code. Then I looked at birthstones since I worked at Hallmark Cards as a model. So I did oxblood for March, diamond for April, and ruby for July. So this sort of celebrates the family, you know. And this is a pull and roll back. It's kind of all everything I'm doing at that time. We can move forward. I'm trying to be watchful all the time. Okay. Okay. And this is called self portrait at 48, but it's really 50 panels. And we have the blank rectangles or my year of mourning. The bottom row is me at 3 o'clock. So it's a profile of me as a female with a ponytail. Front is 6 o'clock. That way is 9 o'clock, and the top is midnight or noon. So as photographers, we're working with formulas, time, and these are silhouettes. So go ahead. This is a big installation too. Stopping down, which is 2001. And again, we go, this is an 8 by 10. We're going from, f1.4 all the way down to, I guess, f.2 or 64. And the negatives are underneath. I'm the only Polaroid artist that can. Go ahead. And they're really incredible. This is stopping down. This idea of time, fading, getting older, RGB, yellow, magenta, cyan, the silhouette, so I'm not really gender coded, which references the early self portraits as well. Go ahead. And this is silhouette. I was a matrix artist in 2004, 2005, and this is the upper, this is JP Morgan's extension at the port. So this is called Swirls and Twirls. And I wrote an essay about this for his show at Mass MoCA called 100 Views. What was so interesting at this time, I was doing the installation upstairs. The Matrix Artists series is founded by the Wadsworth Athenaeum in the 70s because there were no galleries for artists. And it gives an artist like, someone like people Saul had 3 shows, but Jasper Johns, Warhol, Sidney Sherman, Carrie Mae Weems, John Copeland's, it gives them a chance to show their work in a museum setting. The colors are really, this is called swirls and twirls. You can see these colors are very intense, very bright, and this kind of, you know, early 20th century setting. There's stained glass windows on the top. What was so interesting was that Saul was dying. I knew he was dying. He knew that I knew he was dying. And some people knew he was dying. He was dying of cancer. And I just thought this is so incredible that he knows he's dying. There's these incredible colors. So I did do research on the swirls and twirls. I did reference the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. You can go ahead and go to the next one. This is my Matrix show. I was upstairs in the Morgan North, Matrix 153, and this is the support group here, photography degree 0, referencing the minimal. We can go to the next slide. So we have 5 of these in here. It's a very small gallery. Go ahead, go to the next one. And there's 3 panels there. There's another one with black clothes. Go. Okay. So here we got to, they give me some money, and part of the commitment for this show is like, okay, what are you going to do? You can do whatever you want. You're a matrix artist. So I wanted to work on the 4080 camera, which is the next size up. It's basically a camera obscura. So it was a very hot August in 2004. The panels are 44 inches wide and again, roll film. So basically what Polaroid did, it was privately owned at that point, is you cut in half, and then it gets cut in half to 8 by 10 and 4 by 5, etc. So I did 8 panels. There's another black one to the far left here. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we have the negatives on the other side. And they were huge. I mean, so it was this sort of parallel, this conversation between the positives and negatives. And then the poles were in this smaller room, just 5, very minimal, referencing no color photography degrees there. Okay, and there's a 40 by 80. Turns out I was the last person to use that camera. And then the owner, who's Canadian, gave it back. This is me working in the Polaroid studio. So you can see I'm wearing a mask, and there's the pull, the negative pulled off from the Polaroid. Go ahead. I went back in the darkroom, very interested in color, and started exploring my photographs. I have studio visits, and people were saying, okay, what are you going to do with these photographs? You have Man Ray, Molly Dodge, really, Talbot. Got me to thinking about that Talbot would use botanical studies, fern leaves, lace, that I would use my objects that I used to pin up my poles, which were these metal push pins that I got a foam bed. I punctured the paper, I rotated it. So this is a great sort of triptych going from the narrative of representation towards abstraction. using, RGB yellow. So we can go to the next one. This is also starting to break taboos. I became very interested in the biology of seeing. These are called blinks. I got a book by Margaret Livingston, who teaches at Harvard, Mondrian, looking at this idea of neo-op. Go to the next one. That's a digital print. Going back into the studio, doing pen lights, which made white lights, which were great because we didn't know where they would be. And go ahead and make this one. Then I started doing these dings and shadows. This was again a struggle on printing for many, many years, doing these pen lights on photographic paper. I just wasn't quite getting it. I had feedback, trusted people, and they were just like going, no big deal. So I went into the color darkroom with the Fuji, excuse me, this was Kodak Endura paper, 30 by 40 pre-cut paper, beautiful paper. And I went around the box with a pen light, and there was a little tiny crescent in there. And I thought, oh my God, it's a ding. So I came up with this idea. I had my four C's, but I had missed my four C's. My four C's are concept. My work always has to deal with light, half light, no light, shadow, silhouette, reflection, something to do with light. Content, what's in the picture? With a self-portrait, then I have to know the history of self-portraiture. I have to know women in self-portraiture. What am I talking about? Context. And these can overlap. What's the context? Well, the ding is a photographic template. And these were dings that were catching my shadows. So I'm very interested in the shadow image and citation. So what am I referencing? Is it existentialism, minimalism? This is just color. So this is my first suite of RGB, yellow, magenta, cyan. The blue in the middle, people who print color know that photographic uh, blue in photographic color theory is a beautiful kind of royal blue. So there's the royal blue of that as a genuine, and then a little bit of that kind of primary blue in the painting. But go ahead. I did that I had a big breakthrough. This is a pull and roll back. Go ahead. And here's a big installation. I got really restless. I was thinking about size and scale. Robert Smithson, the great earthworks artist, said, well, size can be a crack on the wall or it can be the Grand Canyon. So this represents RGB, yellow, magenta, cyan, what we have in photography called split filters. So this is 20 panels. Basically, each panel is 24 inches by 20, so 2, 4, 6, 8 by basically it's 8 by 8. And my ratio is about 1:5. So for every one I make, that's what I call the A plus. So there's making art and being an artist, then there's the art world, and then there is what the auction houses and other conservators call tier one objects. So tier one is like perfect. The Man Ray, the Wadsworth Athenaeum had a Man Ray show in 1935. They were $50. They bought it between the war and the Great Depression. The last one up went for auction house of Kiki of Montparnasse with the violin, shapes on the back, which Man Ray made through exposure for $1 million. Excuse me, a pull and a roll back. The negatives, sometimes the negatives oxidize, so this particular negative has a kind of map patina. And I love the negatives because it kind of references Talbot's. I don't know how many people have seen Talbot's work in the original, but there's a great book by Larry Schaff on his collective Brooks University Press. The blue references inaccuracies. Go to the next one. Again, this is a triptych. Big one. So the challenge here was this Kodak Endura paper, and I'm printing away, and then they bankrupt. So one day I tell the lab that I'm working with, okay, go ahead and order, 2 more boxes or 3, whatever I could afford. And they come back in and they go, Ellen, Kodak's bankrupt. I'm like, Kodak's bankrupt? What do you mean it's bankrupt? I go, well, that's it. There's no Kodak Endura paper anywhere. There's anywhere in the United States. So I went to the Fuji Crystal Archive, which gave me this, and then got a big box from somebody in Columbus, Ohio. So go to the next one. So you're constantly going to be challenged. This was in response to the Charlie Hebdo in the discotheque in Paris. And I think it was 2016. This is an installation called To Paris with Love, which I started working with an architect in different projects. It has another iteration. We can go to the next one. And here's my Man Ray discovery. So, uh, you know, I can't write more. I do a lot of my own writing about, because I had to explain minimal conceptual experimental work, of course. And remember, photography began like an experiment. Talbot made Jeffrey Jeffrey Batchen at Oxford did a wonderful book. The forms. Let's see, I have the book right here. Anyway, he did terrific. He did over 8,000 experiments. We can go ahead. This is a beautiful picture. It's about 3 inches high by 2 inches, and there. This is the reverse image, and the next image you'll see highlights his name, Man Ray. So Man Ray scholars, none of them noticed his hidden signature in this picture. I saw the original at the Jewish Museum in their show called Alias Man Ray. It's not at the Met Show, but the Met New York City has a fantastic, great catalog. This made me realize that in our field, that no one understands how we make our pictures. And I had a conversation after this was published in the Smithsonian Online Magazine. There was a gentleman named Henry Adams, who's a very well-known scholar that lives in Cleveland. And he thought there was a hidden signature in Jackson Pollock's mural painting. And we had a conversation about this idea of signatures hidden, and that we have to prove his. Mine definitely happens because I talked to a Man Ray, a Jackson Pollock scholar. And he said, "Well, I'm not sure it's in, but this definitely got approved." And we had lots of conversations, and he did not understand how photographs get made. So the combination of our challenges with light, can't hold light, and the changes that we're going through, analog versus digital versus AI, all these kind of skills, which are tools, also makes me realize that the flip side of that is that we have an amazing amount of repertoire of characteristics that we can. So this is a great photograph. The original, however, is really tiny. It's in the Bowdoin College Museum of Art, and this is Man Ray. I also say this is a very sophisticated image because it predates the avant-garde in Paris, where Man Ray was, and his friend was Herbert Matter, was Jackson Pollock's friend, who made these space writings. And this Jackson Pollock scholar said, "Ellen, you're correct. That is the link, the missing link between the avant-garde in Paris and Pollock." Jackson Pollock was married to Lee Krasner. There's a great book called Ninth Street Women if you want to read about that. Herbert Matter and his wife Mercedes used to hang out with Jackson Pollock. So we go to the next one. And this is the Polaroid Project. This is a great book. It's out of print. I should have bought more. I only have 2 copies. This is a great book if you can find it. The University of California Press makes a different iteration. So this one opened at the Amon Carter in 2017, then went to Hamburg, Cologne, Berlin, which I went over there for that. Then it went to Saigon. Then it went to Montreal, where I went with John Rutter as well. Then it went to MIT. We were supposed to do a live session with the poll with the MIT Museum and their whole group of scientists. And then COVID happened, and then we shut down. 2020, Elsa Dorfman passed away, and her Polaroid camera, which she'd been using to 2008, Polaroid went into its official bankruptcy in 2008. It's now owned and operated out of Amsterdam. And I had her camera 21, 22, 23, 24, just like my studio. Go to the next one if you want. And I'm mixing the pods. So in color chemistry, you can mix, C41 film. You can use a different process to get these wild colors. I had black and white pods that were very viscous, the pods that every time Polaroid did a change, I responded. So in 2005, they were leaking. So someone like Chuck Close would get a little line there. He didn't want that. Um, so they cut the pod into thirds and I taped it. So I'm mixing and matching. I'm experimenting. Go ahead with the chemistry. Go ahead. And here's some dings and shadows. Go ahead and go through these. This is a book I did. Here's a chance with the Ellen Carter. This is called Cesara, which is Italian for break in poetry or music. And everyone's talking about digital, 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 go digital. I'm thinking it was a break in from analog to, which digital is not, it's not light hitting light sensitive paper. It's inks hitting paper. So it's a different chemistry, a different process altogether. Things shadows. This is something called the 0 gram.
Oops, sorry.
It's okay.
Oh no.
We're almost at the end.
There we go.
Okay, and I'm renamed the photogram 0 gram because it's zero in zero color darkroom printing of anybody. Okay, we can go ahead. The next one is research on called Women in Color. So Larry Schaff, I talk to, I see from time to time, and I'd say, gee, it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of women doing color. And I wonder why there isn't more work written about Anna Atkins. This, I believe, was before her show at the and he goes, no, no. So it turns out that around 2011, scientists at the University of Washington in Seattle isolated a gene called Tectra, Greek for four, chromatin is color, that women who carry this gene can discern more color than men, who have a 20 to 30% higher rate of color blindness. This kind of reframes Linda Nochling's very famous essay in the early 70s, Where All the Great Women Artists. So, women in color, I had a gallery in the Lower East Side say, Ellen, I want to do one person show. I go, no, no, I don't want to do a show. I want to do this show. This is my scholarship. Women in Color. I called Cindy Sherman first. She goes, yeah, great. Let's do Clown, Laurie Simmons. I Carrie Mae Weems. So this is the iteration called Women in Color in 2017. We can go to the next slide. I did it in Paris. This was great because we had European artists, and this is an image from a woman from Finland named Aho, and her son is running her estate and Women in Color. So Anna Atkins referencing Talbot's contemporary was Anna Atkins, who could do watercolors and paint and draw. Talbot could not. I couldn't paint or draw either. But when you transfer to the cyanotype, this begins the discourse of color in photography and the cyanotype as the container of meaning. I did not know this, but John Rohrback, who is the curator at the Ellen Carter, did a great book called American Color Photography, and he gave a lecture once, and he talked about Ansel Adams and Elliot Porter fighting about color. Like Ansel Adams, like, no, you can't do color, and no, no. And I had that kind of little, uh, bumping heads with John Copeland once. So this is, and I hope to do this show in England. So that's my research project. We can go to the next slide. These are the negatives from some, the next is a positives. This is RGB, smaller ones. RGB, yellow, magenta, cyan. And go to the next one. This is a project I'm doing called Hello again. I started traveling a lot. We have COVID and we can't travel, and we can travel, and then, all this. And I really miss the dark room. And, I can't always be in the dark room. I can't always be in Polaroid. I can't always be reading. So I went to visit my aunt who's a nun, and I had the cell phone with me. She'd never seen a cell phone, and we use, pictures to take pictures of our lives. How many billions of uploads? So I go into her bathroom, and we're doing a double portrait, a bittersweet. So I think, well, I'm going to start taking this iPhone pictures and travel. So I go to Paris, like traveling to South France. I did a workshop. And that middle image is hello. I did this workshop with Martine and Lyle Rexer. And then I did research, and it turns out Stephen Jobs, whose hero was Edwin Land of Polaroid, when he introduced the iPhone to his shareholders, he had a video sequence of people answering the phone, going hello, hello, hello. So I'm like hello again, and revisiting the self portrait. But go ahead, go to the next one. This is a black triptych, only using color Polaroid film. You go to the next one. There's RGB on the top and the yellow magenta cyan. This is a crush and pulse. So I'm taking the crushing idea, the dings and shadows, and kind of, repurposing it and kind of using the Polaroid negatives. The French call it craquelure. The cracking is smooth, but the negatives are actually very raised and topography all of their own. Go ahead. And here I am pulling off the negative and the positive. So it's a one-step peel apart system. The negative is the light sensitive, the positive is not light sensitive. And there you see the scale of the pod that contains the negatives. I mean, the color chemistry, excuse me. The negatives, this is that kind of like more brown. That's kind of what's P3. The ones that are more yellow and kind of chestnut colors are P7. So go ahead, we can go. 2018. And that's it. This is a show that I did. Lights, camera, action. Go ahead. I think I'm coming to the end soon. This is the inside of it. Go to the next one. Is that the last one? Oh, here we have. So the camera comes to my studio, like holy moly. We're in COVID, like whoa, you know, wild, right? My brother predicted this in 1980, told me about AIDS. So one day we're gonna have something that's airborne on. Here it is. Wow. So the camera comes in. We work. John Ruder and I work on Saturday. This is a pull and roll back, RGB, yellow, magenta, cyan. Big installation. Each panel's 22, 2 feet basically, 8 feet. And these are some digs and shadows. And then using the pen light right on the negative. And this is yellow, magenta, cyan, black on the top. And go to the next one. I'm starting to put my hand in there. So when I went to started researching the history of the hand in art, starting with the cave paintings, again, a lot of my projects start with questions. We have a lot of labor in photography. We have a lot of handwork. And in color darkroom, it's all black. There's, goes from touch and sound. So this is a big piece I did. RGB, yellow, magenta, cyan. This was one of the signature pieces at the New Britain Museum. You know the next one. So, okay, so William Henry Fox Talbot, we all know he was the pioneer and polymath and the inventor of the paper negative, which was later contact with a positive. So this was interesting. And I went to the Smithsonian in the fall of 2001, and there were 400 Talbots there. And Mary Ferrell let me look at them, and Larry Schaff is the person who looked at them before me. Excuse me. Hold on. And I was on my sabbatical. Excuse me. And I was supposed to go visit the Talbot Museum. And then we had 9/11. We had the terrorist attack. I was in DC. So I couldn't do that. So when Andrew Cochrane approached me about doing a show at the Fox Talbot Museum, I was like, yeah, let's do it. I'm in. I've been wanting to go there for a long time. And I put in a proposal to him to take what's called a cascade of Bruce needles that Talbot made in 1839. I consider it the first minimal abstract photograph. It is an incredible image. I've never seen it in real life. It belongs to the British Library. I had to get permission. So we re-photographed it digitally, and we blew it up, and I did RGB yellow magenta cyan. So this is my hands in there. Again, the conversation kind of referencing Talbot, minimalism, photographic color theory, Polaroid, the hand. Talbot also did a hand in one of his books. I can't tell if it's his hand or somebody else's, so can't confirm that. So, but they really loved this. This led to a better commission. So we had the Fox Talbot Museum was called Light Struck, and those of you who are familiar with photography know that if something's light struck, it is fog. And then Struck by Light was the parallel of the New Britain Museum. I did get another commission from the Fox Talbot Museum, is managed by the National Trust, which has 500 historical sites throughout the UK. And they gave me extra funds to support. I did a whole series around the lattice window, and then something, a mathematical equation called Talbot's curve. Go to this. Is it? Okay. This is from the Bedford Museum. Get a lecture there. Go ahead. That might be it. Oh, it's not. So the Bibliothèque Nationale did a big show called Blanc et Noir. They had a black and white, but it was in color, minimal monochrome. And then they also had this show about the materiality of the photograph, which is in the show here with using the zerogram as their kind of signature in their posters and catalogs. They also had it in the metros in all of the Paris. And there's the scale of those. So when the Mirrors of Chance book came out, the Amy Carter approached me about doing a book project as an in-house project. I don't have any. I'm in lots of books, but I don't have my own over here, so I don't check the book or anything. So they showed me the project, and I said, "Why don't I make 200 color 8 by 10?" And I called them zero grams. So that's what this is. I made 200 of them. They sold them for $250. I read an essay in there called Mirrors of Chance. The idea of the mirror, the window, chances, randomness, and data, and surrealism. And I purchased the last 50. We did an edition of 200. I think there's only 40 left. So the next one. And this is an installation at the Talbot Museum. If you ever have a chance to go to Laycock, I highly recommend it. It's also where they do a lot of the Harry Potter films. So this is the installation, RGB, yellow, magenta sign keeps going. And we have one, we couldn't do all the negatives, but the one is the red here. And there you have the cascade, Talbot's cascade of spruce needles. It's not, I don't, it doesn't, we're not sure what, it's very small. We're not sure, I'm not sure, scholars aren't sure, like which way it goes, top, bottom. I've looked at this picture upside down, backwards. I reversed it. I flipped it. I've, done all kinds of things. But it is truly a magnificent photograph or paper negative. But they did color match it, so that is okay. I think that's it. Is that the last one?
Yep.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Thank you.
Let me come back to you.
Okay, we're at 8:18. Sorry, I went over a little bit. Sorry.
So we'd like to open it up to questions. Does anyone have questions? If you do, you can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat. If you raise your hand, I think I can turn your mic on.
Is everybody a photographer? Maybe I have questions. Is anybody doing experimental work? Everyone doing that? Yes? Don't be shy. We're halfway around the world here.
I know. Well, I'm curious because you are a professor and you're teaching young photographers. What are some trends you notice, or what are ways, like sometimes it's hard as a teacher for me to motivate them to think. I think
Yes.
in this digital with phones and computers making things so easy for them to get information, to get them to think creative, it's kind of a challenge sometimes.
Is I think it's different in different countries. I think I think America is going through a kind of challenging time right now. when I go to England, it's very different. Um, they really have the National Trust and their whole cultural, they're older than us, the Bath culture, always the 12th century or earlier. So I think that those kind of cultural, we're only a couple hundred years old, really. So I think it's different in different cultures. And I would say the Brits and the French are like way ahead of us. They really appreciate, you know, it's like that's you go to Paris, I mean, forget it. The City of Light, and you have the Eiffel Tower and the Musée d'Orsay, and so they probably think we're a little bit behind, I would say. Students, I don't know what to say. I mean, I try to get them engaged right away, teaching a course which has different disciplines, kind of a gen ed. So we have engineers and musicians, and they love the dark room. I'm bringing them right in the dark room, walking them through, the paper negative to positive, doing cliche bear, color, getting excited. I think the Gen Z, the millenniums, they're challenged in different ways. I think COVID, really was kind of a wake up call for everybody. Um, I talked to a person in Germany that's the head of photo program there, and their their tuition is like non-existent, and they're having the same problem that we engagement. I don't know what to say about that. I mean, you got to do what you love, and if you love it, I mean, you just got to do it. So I don't know what to say. Um,
I find myself pushing my students more, go back and do it again, go back and try something different, like I have to like force it out of them. And then they always seem happy when they
yeah,
do. Yeah.
it's a discipline. I think we have, and I've had great mentors, and certainly, I think it's Malcolm Gladwell who says it takes a minimum of 10,000 hours just to start to get good at something. So
Yes.
I think you have to realize that you have only one life, and you really should make the most of it, and you should try to figure out what you love. Um, I think there's like a lot of white noise out there sometimes, and I think I can spot talent, in a student, and I could say, I mean, you can't turn your backs on your gifts because what's the point? So, I mean, the muses are not going to come around and visit you unless you put in the work. I mean, then you could look at, um, so here's a question: when you're making work, what do you listen to? Okay, whoops, I'm having the same problem with teaching photography. I would just get them in the dark room. I mean, they love photographs. I would just get them in the dark room, set it up, and make contact paper prints, show them Talbot's work, make them understand the artist struggle. You can show them Plato's Cave or Joseph Campbell's. There's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Does everybody know what that is? You have the bottom foundation and you want to go up. So, but they can look at, I can throw them out a question and say, well, you pick two people, like you have to tell me why Jackson Pollock's great or Van Gogh's great, or pick somebody that's a great artist, a photographer. Because only if you understand why that's a great picture can you aspire to that. And it's really creativity. There's a British scholar who passed away in 2020. His name is Ken Robinson, and he studied creativity. Um, and he has something called divergent thinking. And he said America is the lowest in the schools. It's almost like our schools are teaching you how to be anti-creative. We're in a capitalist consumer culture, so it's very different from England and the social in France and Canada. So it's very different. I think, I want them to love what they do and try to find out what they do.
Yeah. I think they surprise themselves when they get rolling sometimes, or if you introduce something new to
Yeah, we
them.
bunch of little kids in our dark rooms. We had the uh, faculty and people who work, staff that work at the University of Hartford could bring in their children to to the black and white darkroom. I think they were 6 years old. I had this conversation with this little guy who was 6 years old. His name was, I'm not kidding you. He was making fantastic photographs. I was like, wow, you want to come into my class? And, you know, like he was so excited. He's
Yeah.
putting out these, we had them all in these little trays, and his name was, I think his name was Jason Love, Love. I thought, wow, that's a very telling. My name's Ellen. After my parents died, I found a book, Irish names for boys and girls, and the word Ellen means light or bringer of light in Irish Celtic. So, there's some wonderful moments if you're just paying attention.
Yeah.
But I do think the computer, I mean, I don't know, go for a swim, go for a walk. I mean, any other questions? I think we're at 8:25.
Any last questions for Ellen? You can raise your hand or you can type something into the, um, oh, um, oh, someone's asking, David, when you're making your work, do you listen first to material, the place, and the story?
Come again when I'm making my work? What do I?
Do you listen for first the material, the place, or the story?
Depends on where we're starting. I mean, in the dark room, I keep notes on all my sessions. I just did a big session on new things and shadows a couple of years ago. I wanted to bring in gray, which is hard to do in the color dark room with the dials, yellow, magenta. I got it, and then I, just did a whole new session. So I kind of start with a general idea of what I want to do. With Polaroid, it's different. It's $2,000 a day and $200 exposure. Plus, I have to pay my assistant, John, pay him a fee. And this, it's just like expensive. I try not to think about money, how much money. It's just like, oh, okay, forget it. Just make a commitment. So it depends on. I'm returning to black and white now. I did a cliche bear workshop at Penumbra in New York City. So I'm exploring the combination of word. I somehow am thinking about putting words in my work. I don't know what words those are, but I'm thinking about. I just did some cliche bear combinations with the hand. So I'm sort of working towards it kind of doesn't matter where I start, just as long as I follow my four C's. And they could go, now it's what am I citing? It's, the content is cliche bear, photogram, going back to monochrome, black, white, gray. So they don't work. The black, white, dings and shadows do not work in black and white. I already did a material test to answer that question. The porcelain, black and white paper, Fuji, excuse me, Ilford gloss or matte or any of those colors. Excuse me, black and white paper, Ilford, it has a slight porcelain coating and it doesn't crack the same as the Fuji crystal I bought. So I've tested papers. Um, they just don't look good. I did a few. I did about a dozen. I'm like, that doesn't work. So I do want to get back to black and white, but it has to have that je ne sais quoi. It has to have I'm not sure what that is yet. My challenge. So
I have a feeling it will come to you.
I don't know. I'm percolating. Been percolating for about a year now, so it takes me time to work through these things. So they're all unique artwork, so you're seeing the best of me when you see an exhibition. You see the A
Of
plus,
course.
year one, the best of me. So when we had the show at Fox Tower, we didn't know how many people would come because a little bit out. I got the phone call in 2022. I had my show in Paris. Things were just opening up. It's 2023. You still don't know what's going on. The heat waves. Well, so we had 220,000 visitors. Like, wow, that's a lot. It's a little tiny town. It's a hamlet.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, we're just coming up on 8:30. Does anyone have any final questions or comments they'd like to contribute?
Thank you very much. Okay,
Yes, thank you.
Mike, it to you, fellow light travelers.
We really appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight and sharing your wisdom and your work with us. Thank you.
I'll make some great photographs. That's all I gotta say.
I think we're a little more inspired now.
Don't let go of your analog, whatever it is you love. Just don't tell anybody. I used to tell people, we used to say, "What do you do? What do you do?" Oh, I'm a nun. I would just make up stuff. Make up stuff. See you later.
And thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining us from near and far. We appreciate you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Welcome.